And we're back, finishing up on the cranial nerves here on the back half, the second half. Yeah, it's really all I can think of, but we're gonna go through 7 to 12 of the cranial nerve. So cranial nerve number 7 is the facial nerve. So facial nerve carries all three types of information. So motor information, sensory information, and parasympathetic information. Let's start with the motor information. So the majority of the skeletal muscles in the face, just all the muscles in the face, whether the buccinator, the frontalis, all the muscles, or most of the skeletal muscles of the face are affected by or are controlled by the facial nerve, essentially. There, so we can smile, we can do all that stuff, all the different faces we can make. The motor information is carried by the facial nerve there. So obviously the muscles are the organs that contract, but the motor information is carried by the facial, or motor information of the most of the skeletal muscles of the face are carried by the facial nerve there. So there's also sensory information, obviously proprioception, because anytime there's motor information carried by a cranial nerve, there's going to be a proprioception as well. Not a proprioception, there's going to be proprioception as well, a verb, which is to what degree is the muscle relaxed or contracted. Also, sensory information is facial nerve is responsible for taste sensation, or taste, the sensation of taste on the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. So, facial nerve. So you got that right. But no, the taste of on the anterior, so the front 2/3 of the tongue, is due to the facial nerve. So that's sensory information, is the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, relating to taste as well as proprioception. And then last but certainly not least, parasympathetic information carried by the facial nerve is twofold. So the facial nerve is responsible for the secretion and stimulation of salivary glands. So salivary glands do produce saliva, which do a couple different things. Saliva helps break down food to help us digest it, and arguably more important than just the catabolic reactions of breaking down food in our mouth is saliva does break down bacteria and pathogens. So it's a defense mechanism, essentially, to destroy bacteria. So also, parasympathetic information carried by the facial nerve, cranial nerve number 7, is associated with the lacrimal glands. So lacrimal glands produce tears. Tears do a couple different things. They obviously lubricate the eye, but arguably more important, once again, they do help to break down or dilute pathogens that are in our eyes. So saliva, similar to tears produced by the lacrimal glands, are defense mechanisms of our body, either in our mouth or in our eyes there. So that's the parasympathetic information carried by the facial nerve, is the production or secretion stimulation of saliva, which is a defense mechanism, helps break down food. And then lacrimal glands produce tears, which lubricate the eye and help to dilute pathogens as a defense mechanism. But one condition that's associated with the facial nerve, or the lack of function, I guess, if you will, of one of the facial nerves, is Bell's palsy. So we'll see it a lot of times with individuals with Parkinson's disease, but it's typically one side of this pair of the facial nerve. So it's usually not both, typically just one pair or one side of the facial nerves. Pretty much they'll be drooping sometimes due to the lack of control. So other symptoms we're going to see, since the motor information that's carried by the facial nerve does control the majority of the skeletal muscles of the face, that's why we see that drooping of one portion of the face. There's also going to be symptoms of dry eyes due to that the information we just learned about the lacrimal glands producing tears. There's going to be dry eyes, so decrease production of tears, essentially. There's going to be dry mouth due to lack thereof secretion and stimulation of the salivary glands. And then there's also going to be a decrease in taste due to that sensory information of the anterior two-thirds of the tongue. So symptoms of Bell's palsy are going to be dry mouth, dry eyes, and dry mouth as well. So it's normally Bell's palsy is a temporary condition, but it sometimes can be permanent. So yeah, we'll see it a lot of times with individuals with Parkinson's, but it's really a tough condition for individuals due to usually just one of those pairs or one of those one side of the facial nerves not functioning. Also, cranial nerve number 8, so that's cranial nerve number 7 is the facial nerve. Cranial nerve number 8 is the vestibular cochlear nerve. So that seems like a big vestibular cochlear. So vestibulo-cochlear nerve has also been called the auditory nerve in the past, and we're gonna see why here. So the vestibular cochlear nerve, it innervates the inner ear, which is the deepest part of the ear. So really, let's shove the pen into the deepest portion of our ear. Please don't, actually, do not do that. But the vestibular cochlear nerve innervates the deepest part of the ear. And there's two parts of that inner ear. There's the cochlea and the vestibule. So the cochlea is aids in hearing. So the cochlea actually detects the sound waves, and then it sends that information to the brain so we can hear it. So cochlea detects sound waves, sends the information to the brain so we can hear it. So it's very, very important in hearing. The cochlea is the inner portion of the ear. Another portion of the inner ear is the vestibule, Vestibule, very important in maintaining balance. So there are two portions of this vestibulo-cochlear nerve, pretty damn common sense. There's the cochlear branch and the vestibular branch. So cochlear branch obviously aids and affects hearing. The vestibular branch, you got it. You don't got to be a rocket scientist to figure that out. So take it off your back. That was an easy way. Actually, nah, just go ahead, pat yourself in the back. But the vestibular branch is important in maintaining balance. So that's why if you ever have an ear infection, there's going to be problems with balance and hearing. And a note that I didn't mention previously, vestibulo-cochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 8, is all sensory information. So there's no parasympathetic information, and there's no motor information. So purely sensory information with the vestibulo-cochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 9. So now we're going to talk about cranial nerve number... Wait, that was cranial nerve number 8, excuse me. So cranial nerve number 7 is the facial nerve. I'm getting ahead of myself. Cranial nerve number 8 is vestibulo-cochlear nerve. Cranial nerve number 9, there we go, boys and girls, is the glossopharyngeal nerve. So cranial nerve number 9 is the glossopharyngeal nerve. So there's motor information, sensory information, and parasympathetic information with the glossopharyngeal. That's glossopharyngeal. So that's a mouthful. Glossopharyngeal. It innervates muscles important in swallowing. So the pharynx, as you may know, is associated with the throat there. So motor information of the glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve number 9, is going to be most of the muscles important in swallowing. So it's going to innervate those muscles. Also sensory information, obviously proprioception, to what degree is the muscle contracted or relaxed. And so we talked about the anterior two-thirds of the tongue relating to the taste sensation with the facial nerve. Now the posterior 1/3 of the tongue and its effect on taste is actually controlled by the Glossopharyngeal nerve. So the posterior third of the tongue, the taste sensation is due to the Glossopharyngeal nerve. And then last but certainly not least, the parasympathetic information that the glossopharyngeal nerve is responsible for, it regulates blood pressure. So motor information of the glossopharyngeal nerve is going to be muscles important in swallowing. Sensory information, proprioception, in the posterior 1/3 of taste sensation, and then the parasympathetic information of the glossopharyngeal cranial nerve number 9 is going to be regulating blood pressure. So now we got cranial nerve number 10, the vagus nerve. That's not the Las Vegas, it's spelled V-A-G-U-S. Aww, boo-hoo. But yeah, I was trying to think of a hangover quote. I can't think of anything right now. Something, hey, baby Carlos, or something like that. But the vagus nerve, it's purely parasympathetic information. So the vagus nerve doesn't focus on just the head and the neck, as we've seen with the previous ones, previous cranial nerves. It also innervates organs of the ventral cavity. So the ventral cavity is that front portion of the cavity here, or front portion of the diaphragm, thoracic region, that frontal portion of our bodies. The vagus nerve will innervate some of these areas, so such as like the digestive organs, the heart, the kidneys, bronchi, which are tubes in the lungs, and then there's also more areas. So vagus nerve, there's no really specific region, kind of just wanders all throughout the body. So if you ever seen watched the movie Pulp Fiction with John Travolta, Samuel L. Jackson in it, John Travolta's name in the movie is Vincent Vega, and you wonder if some scientists got the name from Vincent Vega, or if Quentin Tarantino got the Vincent Vega from the vagus nerve, because Vincent Vega in the movie Pulp Fiction was a gangster who just kind of wandered around and jumped from place to place, lived from place to place, never really had one set area. And same with the vagus nerve. It has really no one set area. It's not just the head or neck. It might innervate the heart, the digestive organs, kidneys, and so on and so forth, and other organs of the ventral cavity. So just a reminder that the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 10, is purely parasympathetic information. So now we're on cranial nerve number 11. That's the accessory nerve. So the accessory nerve, cranial nerve number 11, is it's going to have sensory information and motor information. The motor information is going to be muscles associated with the neck, so the sternocleidomastoid, the trapezius, and the sensory information of the accessory nerve, cranial nerve number 11, is obviously going to be proprioception there, the sensory information. So we got the motor information of the neck, and then the sensory information, proprioception, cranial nerve number 11, the accessory nerve. Now last but certainly not least is going to be the hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve number 12. So the hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve number 12, is related to muscles associated with the tongue. So these the hypoglossal nerve can obviously affect speech due to the muscles, or the motor information being the muscles of the tongue. So the muscles of the tongue do affect speech. So the hypoglossal nerve, the motor information of the hypoglossal nerve are the muscles of the tongue. So it innervates muscles of the tongue, which ultimately affects speech. So it can obviously hinder speech if this nerve isn't working properly. And then obviously, as there is with any motor information of cranial nerves, there's going to be proprioception. So cranial nerve number 12 is the hypoglossal nerve. It innervates muscles associated with the tongue, which ultimately can affect speech. And then the sensory information of the hypoglossal nerve, cranial nerve number 12, is going to be proprioception. So cranial nerve number 7, Facial nerve, cranial nerve number 8, vestibulocochlear nerve, cranial nerve number 9, glossopharyngeal nerve, cranial nerve number 10, the vagus nerve, cranial nerve number 11, accessory nerve, and cranial nerve number 12. You got it, the hypoglossal nerve, which carries motor information of muscles associated with the tongue, which alters and affects speech. And then there's proprioception, which is the sensory information. And don't forget it, because you got it, and now it's in there. And the cranial nerves help with all that. They really do.